It's a pleasure to see you all here today for, as I mentioned, the first event of our event series in 2024. Wow, how do we get here? How do we get here? Something that we're going to be picking up on with our esteemed panel today. We have we're very lucky to have some guests with us who have had a front row seat to the Conference of Parties negotiations that happened this past December, just a little bit over a month ago in Dubai. We're having this event to understand a little about what happened there. Most of you have probably already seen news reports or read some of the links that we shared in previous messages to you about what happened at COP. We'll unpack a little bit of that, but most importantly, today we're focused on, now that the COP28 Article 6 and 6.2, 6.4 negotiations have come and gone. What does that mean for carbon removal, and what next steps can we pursue as a carbon removal industry, as startups in that industry, as other stakeholders in that industry, to bring carbon removal to achieve gigaton scale? That's our mission at AirMiners, to achieve the 1 billion tons of CO2 removed by the end of 2030. How can the COP28 how can the results of COP28 in the run up to the COP29 meeting play into that? So that's why we're here today. It's a pleasure to have you all. Again, I'll be moderating this one today. Some housekeeping notes first. Deborah Graywolf, our esteemed operations manager, is going to be managing the chat today. Hey, Deb. Deb's off camera right now. And we're going to have, as we usually do, our discussion for about 40-45 minutes among the panel, and then we'll open the floor up to questions from you, our audience, so that we can engage and learn. This event is being recorded with the intent to put it onto our YouTube channel. So I saw a couple people requesting AI companions. There's really no need for that. We are going to record this for viewing later on. So it might take a day or two, but that will be available publicly for people to watch at their leisure. We're, as we typically do, going to halt the main part of the event at the top of the hour in just under 60 minutes, and then hang on for another 30. I'll be here for another 30 minutes after that, so that we can all get to know each other, not simply know of each other, if that makes sense. So what we're going to do is have some post-event networking. Feel free to stay. We'd love it if you can, but it's also understood that if everyone's busy. So without any further ado, I will get started. So let's have a quick introduction to our panelists. We've got Tamme, Olga Gassan-zade, and Helen Bray, as well as our own Tito Jankowski as panelists. Why don't we start off with Olga? Olga, please, quick introduction about you, your role, and learn about what your role has been in COP28. Oh, Olga, you're muted.
Hi everyone. Yeah, my name is Olga Gassan-zade, and I'm an Article 6 negotiator. So I was at the COP as a negotiator. I am also a member of the Article 6.4 Supervisory body, and I've been chairing it in 2023, so last year, and I'm continue to be chair until the first meeting of this year. But I am here, of course, as my personal capacity, not necessarily as the chair. Overall, been working in climate change for about 20 years, and I am an expert in industrial greenhouse gas emissions and reductions.
Okay, great, thanks. Eva.
Thank you. Well, very glad to be here. Thanks for the invite. I am a climate policy expert. I have, as Olga, been in this space for 20 years now. And I'm just so excited to have this conversation actually with the people that we have in the panel. That's great. So my background is I've spent 15 years as a policy maker, focusing on climate policy. And currently I'm running my own advisory company that specifically focuses on carbon markets, carbon removal, and carbon capture. I'm also wearing many different hats here today in my personal capacity, more or less. And yeah, very much looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Helen.
Hi, I'm Helen Bray. I'm Vice President of Policy for Puro Earth. Again, I've been around. I'm an old hand, so over 20 years. Super excited to be connected to this community. I've been around working on carbon markets since their inception in the late 90s, early 2000s, always looking at the energy transition and how to get to net zero. More recently, focusing on the net in net zero. And I'm super excited this community has done so much to raise the profile. Thanks, Tito. Thanks, Jason, and everyone. And then let's get started in what's happened and also what we can do for 2024 to keep that profile and to get what we need to deliver these really important solutions. Thank you.
LFG indeed. With that, Tito, bring us home.
Hey, Tito, CEO of AirMiners. I was on the ground at COP28 in the green zone, talking with people about the need for carbon removal and talking with investors about investing in carbon removal. And now I'm on my way to Davos on Saturday to continue that conversation.
Okay. Excellent, excellent. And for those of you who follow Tito's newsletter, you've been appraised of all of Tito's comings and goings over the last weeks and months. So great. To level set and just get started today, again, we've shared some of the chief news items, and you've probably seen them reported. So we don't want to get too much in the details, but I just want to ask you all, the panel, what was the mood at COP28 regarding Article 6 negotiations? What are if you had to think of any main points coming out of that, what would be what would be a chief talking point that's an implication for carbon removal companies today? Helen, why don't we start with you? It looks like you're unmuted.
Thank you. I didn't know where you want to go. Please signpost. So I think if I may, I just might take you outside of Article 6 for a moment. Is that okay? Right. And reflect on COP28. So what do I go there for? COP28 is like an onion. It has many different layers. And so I went there. It's down to technical negotiations, of which, Olga is the total expert, and Eva as well. And then it goes back up to a trade fair. And COP28 was such a big bringing together of the community that I think my biggest reflection that I'd like for this community to be aware of is the response to the global stocktake. So the response to the global stocktake, which is, are we on track to keep 1.5 degrees alive, was basically saying, no, we need governments to take action and removals are important. That for me is a game changer. And then when you look at the construct of the Paris Agreement, which was negotiated around 8 years ago, it's an agreement of bottom-up pledges by governments. And so what I'm looking for is, will governments respond to what was agreed at COP and start to really put durable carbon removals within their national pledges? That's what I'm looking for in 2024 because of what was agreed at COP28. And I can make comments on Article 6 if you'd like, but that for me was the key takeaway. And also this new language around net zero by 2050, which we haven't always seen by 2050 in UN documentation. Normally it's the second half of this century. So again, timelines coming forward and removals mentioned within that document.
Great. Olga, curious to get your thoughts about COP and implications based on some of Helen's comments just now.
Thank you. I mean, it's very helpful that Helen sort of focused on you know, on the cover decision and the mitigation part of it. I mostly worked on Article 6, you know, and for you to imagine what COP is like. I don't know if anybody, if everybody goes there, but you know, it's a huge area where many things are happening at the same time, and for people who were there, you know, following business events, for example, you know, they might not have followed negotiations. At the same time, negotiators like us, we have not been able to get out of the negotiating rooms. You know, there was a specific designated area where negotiations happen, and that's where you stay. You know, there's like one meeting room that we have been logged into from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. and then until 10 p.m. until midnight. And for Article 6, you know, this Article 6 is an article in the Paris Agreement, and I encourage everyone to read it. It's very short, and it basically establishes that countries can cooperate with each other when they achieve their Paris commitments. And then, you know, they can do it bilaterally or through cooperation between several countries. They can use a multilateral mechanism. They can be also non-market mechanisms. So these are the acronyms that we use for this are the 6.2, which is the bilateral or several countries, you know, open mechanism, or multilateral 6.4, and 6.8 is the non-market mechanisms.
Okay.
And majority of us just negotiate all of this. So that's that then there's been really difficult negotiations, as they normally are. And you might have heard we have not had any decisions. They've been really difficult from the start, and they have resulted not just in like no agreement. We have completely wiped everything that we've done over the past year. So it goes back to end of last year.
Got it. Thank you. Eva, what's your take on some of the things that Helen and Olga just now mentioned?
Thanks. So in the very beginning, I actually forgot to point out that I was not in person at COP28. Unfortunately, had to cancel my trip at the last moment, but I did follow the negotiations online, and well, maybe people don't know that it's possible to do that. You actually can do that. At least those parts of the negotiations that are open to observers. But yeah, I agree with Helen in general. COP28 actually was a rather successful COP, if we can call it that, because after every COP we always hear on one side how it was a disaster, and on the other side how it did the impossible. It's just kind of an ever old story. But now hearing from Helen regarding the global stocktake, which was the major headline during the COP, and now from Olga about Article 6, I think it's also important to point out that luckily for the Article 6 community, the decision on the global stocktake specifically also outlined the importance of Article 6 and its role. So it's really great to have that recognition as part of the work on the ambition. I think if we look how the CDR community took the outcome of COP28, there was a lot of disappointment, because there were probably high hopes, given that so many new stakeholders had learned about this process during the last year, and the work that Olga did at the Article 6.4 supervisory body made all of this work so much more accessible. So there were so many who were following it up and expecting good outcomes. Other people, me included, I knew it was going to be difficult to see the removals guidance to be adopted, because not everyone was fully on board. But I'm not sure if I imagined to see how political these which were intended to be super technical discussions eventually became. So there is a lot to untangle, and I really feel for the people that Olga worked with for the full year that had their work, as she said, wiped out, and and now they are back to where they were in the beginning of previous year. So yeah, I'm sure we will get down to the weeds at some point here, but I'll leave it here.
Yes, and we will do that. So thank you, Tito. Just from your standpoint, again, being on the ground in Dubai, what was your sense of the vibe at the conference? I mean, understood you were more in the green zone, more as Helen mentioned, more the trade show area of the event rather than the policy negotiations part, but the blue zone, as it were. But what was your take, having been there for quite a few days?
Yeah, it was. Everybody was there. Everybody in the climate world had really descended on Dubai. I just looked this up, that there were 40,000 attendees of COP25, 50,000 for COP26, and there were more than 100,000 people registered this year. I guess I skipped COP27, but 100,000 people this year registered. It was like huge. There were 73 events about carbon removal that were tracked by carbonremovals.org. Right, so carbon removal was very much in discussion. We had 60 plus people from the AirMiners community on a WhatsApp group that were all on the ground in Dubai. And the key takeaway that I have going into this year was, outside of the scientific community, outside of the AirMiners and carbon removal community, a lot of people that are active in climate still think that decarbonization alone is enough to hit our climate targets. It's not, and that's something I'm going to be working on coming into this year. Is decarbonization and carbon removal are necessary to hit our climate targets.
Great. Again, one of the things that we're acutely aware of in AirMiners is the position of carbon removal vis-a-vis other methods of solving our climate problems. So, very good point, Tito. In terms of, Eva had mentioned, and Olga said that we're kind of, and Helen, that we're kind of back to square one here in terms of what the Article 6 negotiations mean. Tito, you were part of, and Olga were part of an effort to influence the supervisory body by having by marshaling efforts among different carbon removal organizations in an open letter that was sent. Tito in particular, I should say, was led that and talked to Olga quite a few times. What are some of the takeaways, and what are some of the next steps now that we're focusing on the next COP? What's at stake, so to speak, for the carbon removal community over the next 10 or 11 months, say, in the run-up to the next Conference of Parties event? Olga, I think you're a little bit maybe closer to the actual negotiations, so I'll start with you, but anyone else on the panel, feel free to chime in.
Well, I think, just continuing to follow these bases, this is where work will still be happening. When I said that everything has been wiped out, that was for the negotiators. The SB work goes back. We sort of don't yet know how the SB members will react, because there's absolutely no decisions, right? We're still to come back with the guidance, and that guidance will continue to be elaborated. And I think I would probably, I'd rather not go into detail, but I can eventually. But just generally is that it's following, and I think a very important part of what needs to happen until the next COP is, the more the community advances with practical knowledge and practical experience, the better. And of course, keeping an eye on the political developments. And then I think I'm happy to come back to, because there are quite a few of them, so I don't want to monopolize the mic.
Sure. Helen, from your perspective, what's, again, at Puro, you're a startup in the space. You're certainly getting off the ground, very well known. What's the what's the implication from your standpoint about what Puro can work on, what companies who are also in the carbon removal industry can work on?
Yeah, so we're a carbon crediting program for durable carbon removal methods. So issuing carbon credits if they follow our methodologies and publishing those in our registry. And carbon must be stored for at least 100 years. And so why did we engage, again, back to Article 6, but also, access to climate finance? So why did we engage in Article 6.4? Because that mechanism, ultimately, there's not much role for Puro Earth because it's a UN-run body which will issue its own credits. But we did it because we felt it was very important that that mechanism covered all removals and was open to this community, even though our role is very limited. So let's not forget Article 6 is voluntary. It's about raising ambition. So to your community, if you're at a project where you're wanting to get ready, you want to enable climate finance, you can use standards from the voluntary carbon markets, such as Puro Earth. That can still happen. And actually what we saw at COP28 was a bringing together of really big players in the voluntary carbon market. So you had the Integrity Council for the voluntary carbon market, you had the Voluntary Carbon Markets Integrity Initiative, we had the Science Based Targets Initiative, we had the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, all coming together to say, look, we want to provide end-to-end integrity to this market, which is really important. So my view there is, whilst Article 6 is developed, and let's not forget, government-to-government trades can happen and have happened this week. We've seen that trade between Switzerland and Thailand focused on electric buses. Okay, it's emission reductions at the moment, but removals could happen that way. Article 6 is not the only way for this community to be supported. And what happens whilst Article 6.4 mechanism is being developed, and there's further work on the government-to-government mechanism, the 6.2, the voluntary carbon market needs to step up. And it needs to be able to deliver that climate finance because we haven't got time to wait. And that's what I'm hoping to see this year. And that's what I'm hoping your community will take from this, that there's still mechanisms to support climate finance, and we need to work with the negotiators that are working on the United Nations mechanisms. But it's not all or nothing. It's not one or the other. Both exist at the same time. Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Helen. Olga, you looks like you raised your hand, please.
Yes, I raised my hand because I think Helen touched on one of the issues of why that sort of goes closer to why why we had no agreement on Article 6 in Dubai, and that is the role of voluntary markets and whether they can continue to be independent. Right. So we have seen movement, right, in at least the inside the EU. There's several countries that are advocating that there should be no transactions between countries unless they're Article 6 transactions. And that voluntary market should move towards ATMOs, which are the units under Article 6. And then the second part of that conversation is if everything is Article 6 and needs government approvals, then would it have to be 6.4? Or can it still be 6.2, which is not governed by a multilateral supervisory body like the ESB? And this is me speaking as a negotiator. So these are kind of the major fault lines that are very political, is very hard to agree on.
Got it. Eva, in light of what Olga just mentioned, what's possible for a carbon removal project developer under the state of affairs now? What could be possible in the future? That
is the broadest possible question one can ask, right?
Sorry. Well, how about this? To get a little bit more specific, if someone's a project developer out there, Olga and Helen mentioned that, look, there's already transactions happening for carbon removal credits. Again, the Switzerland-Thailand agreement earlier this week,
Yeah.
which I think you also highlighted yourself. How can a project developer then function today under this current regime, and what would be what would be the difference? What would be at stake for a 6.4 or 6.2 agreement that would make a change?
Yeah. So the preparation for COP29 started the minute COP28 ended, right? So that's already an ongoing process. So anyone who's thinking ahead to COP28 and at some point it will arrive, and then before that we will prepare, the preparation needs to start now. But the challenge around Article 6 is that we are yet to find out, and especially under 6.4, how strong the appetite is to find a solution that would get us to a compromise and recommendations that can be adopted. So practically for project developers, as the 6.4 mechanism, the centralized mechanism, is not yet operational due to the decisions not being taken at COP28, but Article 6.2, the bilateral mechanism, is already operational, and we've heard reference to the transaction between Thailand and Switzerland, and that wasn't a carbon removal project, that was an emission reduction project. So just putting it out there.
Thank you.
If it hasn't been shared yet, but there is this great resource at IETA's website that outlines the current transactions between or agreements between countries under Article 6.2. Most of those memorandums of understanding and so on, they are focusing on emission reduction projects, but over time we should start seeing, and as all the stakeholders do their serious work of capacity building with all the governments, explaining why removals are needed, and as Olga said, what is already possible, because oftentimes there's such a gap between what's happening on the ground and what you see here at AirMiners compared to what the policymakers know. We need to get to the point where there's also a growing share of removals being traded under 6.2. So that is an opportunity for the project developers. However, we were hoping that the 6.4 mechanism would provide this really high quality standard that would then be followed by parts of the voluntary market and potentially the 6.2 trades. But now that we don't have it, it's clear that, as Helen said, other parts will follow, the voluntary markets will continue growing, and the 6.2 will also continue growing by itself. And to quite some extent, I think, using the infrastructure of the voluntary markets, because countries can decide to use whatever they want to use. They don't need to invent the bicycle, right? When they want to do carbon trades and think about methodologies.
Okay, so Tito had asked, what are some of the practical examples of actions that companies can take? It sounds like working through looking, if one wants to do an international transaction of carbon credits, looking to the existing 6.2 mechanism would be a starting point. Does that square with your understanding, Eva? Or Helen, it looks like you have something to add as well, and Olga.
Thanks. So I think, again, it's my job to bring this, what does it mean for business? So if you're looking to have your project certified because it meets certain rules of the methods, and you want to be able to sell carbon credits, you can do that through the voluntary carbon market, and you can choose the standard or the carbon crediting program which best fits what you want. And maybe for some of your community, those methods are still need to be designed, and we're just starting to work on the ocean environment. That's the voluntary carbon market. Now, what we talked about and what Olga and Eva have been very clear on was a specific article of the Paris Agreement. And this is all about international cooperation. So Article 6.2 is government-to-government trade. And I'm not sure that that's going to be, and it's normally global north, global south, how, you'd be able to tell based on where your project is based, if there's going to be a government so interested in it. But it's going to be in the short term. And I like to focus short term here, because I can talk about 20 years time or 2 years time. In the short term, the clear signal from this COP is the voluntary carbon market is where you go to, and we build momentum within government-to-government trades and the 6.4 mechanism, so it's open to all removals. It might still be in 2 years' time, you as a project decide to use the voluntary carbon market, or you decide to use 6.4 when it's operational. I want everyone to be aware that Article 6 isn't the be-all and end-all for CDR. It would be great when it is operational, but in the short term it isn't, so you need to look at what is open to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Helen. Olga.
Right. It's quite complex though, and I think I'd like to comment on what both Eva and Helen said. I think for me the next things is basically demonstrating that what is high integrity quality, right? And I don't necessarily think that it only can come from 6.4. And if there's the great initiatives in the voluntary market space, and we need to demonstrate how that can possibly work, because there are very particular views into what high integrity is and quality, specifically coming towards the EU, from the EU, sorry, and they don't, me as Article 6 negotiator, I don't necessarily agree with them, right? And quite a few others don't necessarily agree with the views of other parties. So I think it's a good opportunity actually to try to work out, what is excellent, good standard, good quality, what is good integrity. When it comes to Article 6 and 6.2 and being government to government, I think honestly, I think as we go forward, any transactions when they become, when they are transnational, right, with the transboundary, they will need to become Article 6. Whether they become 6.2 or 6.4 is a good question. And this is one of the disagreements, in the global political international negotiations, right? That's whether project-based transactions should be 6.4 or 6.2.
Got it.
For now, because none of these limits are there, it is indeed, the best way companies can act is by acting on the voluntary market, by thinking through what are these best practices, best integrity criteria, and also trying to apply some of the sort of conceptual elements that are starting to come out in this international policy arena. When it comes to the SB work, for example, that comes to risk assessments, monitoring verification cycle for SB, for example, we talked about post-crediting monitoring. How long is there appetite for that, and on what basis? Downward adjustments that SB has talked about in its methodological guidance, and how they would affect the renewables community when your expected revenue has been adjusted, and to a degree like what is it that acceptable level of adjustments on what basis. So these are the kind of the critical things that are not there yet, but they're part of these conversations. And the more practical experience there is, the more lessons have been learned, the better, before this is all implemented and put on paper.
Okay. Thank you, Olga. Eva, sounds like you wanted to add a comment.
Yes.
Please.
Indeed. Yeah, kind of a reaction and maybe question based on what Olga was just talking about. And I know that we are completely taking over from you, Jason, and just reacting to each other.
Please.
But
No,
maybe,
this is great.
but that makes it more fun, right?
Yes.
So, you know, this idea about working out what is a high integrity, high quality credit, and what are the right methodologies. I keep hearing this question, and we have already, you know, so many initiatives working on it from different angles. And at the same time, we do have plenty of real world examples on basically all the questions that I think the supervisory body has been grappling, because existing standards already have methodologies that are looking at how long the monitoring periods are, whether they go beyond post-crediting. I know examples of downward adjustments. Of course, these come with different, there might be different reasonings behind it, but like that experience is there. And I am to some extent just wondering, are we just endlessly seeking for something, and while doing that we will create yet another report describing high integrity, high quality credits, because there are so many of them? And like, what is it that will actually get us there, where we have this one base that we can kind of build on? Because it feels like it's increasingly difficult to achieve it. And I do see that, for example, the EU is preparing their carbon removal certification framework. And in the context of that, there is a Commission expert group that will develop the methodologies or propose them to the Commission that will later hopefully adopt them. And in the context of that, a consultant who works for that expert group made an overall mapping of different carbon removal methods last time, specifically for permanence carbon removal methodologies. And there is so much happening. Even I learned lots of that I didn't know existed. So I think we have a lot more already than we think we do. And we somehow need to get that information out there, but also start making decisions based on it.
Great. Great. Tito, you sounds like you had something to add to that.
Yeah, just what I got from Olga, what I got from Olga was, you know, leaning into the voluntary carbon markets, and that's what I'm getting from Helen as well, and Eva, and I think that, like, for me as you know, a player in this industry, what I hear for startups is, you know, VCMs aren't going anywhere. Like, befriend the voluntary carbon markets, understand who you can work with, how you can work with them. That's the takeaway from this year, is like, yeah, go call up the people who are the marketplaces, the ratings agencies. This is who it's going to be for the foreseeable future. And so you know, start to take action with that in mind, rather than kind of waiting for something else to come along. And so I appreciate hearing that from across the board, and especially Olga. Great.
Thank you. I'm going to go into questions and answer the questions from the audience right now. So on that point, we had a question that got upvoted from Rafael Baroza at Microsoft. I think he said that he had to leave, though, so I'll just recite it here. It's actually for Olga in particular. For those writing carbon removal transaction agreements, what are the key things they should bear in mind as regards Article 6? What are the key uncertainties? How could private transactions be structured to help advance the conversation? That got upvoted by 3 or 4 people.
Right. Well, it's hard, you know, and I don't take no legal liability on advising transactions at this point. But for I think, you know, what you would need to understand if you're in private transboundary transactions, right, is that eventually they can be affected by by the requirements on either of the side to put it into Article 6 track. And so you need to understand what are the limitations and difficulties of this process, like either the issuing country or the country where the units are going to, how they're going to potentially accommodate for that. But also whether even if you look at the existing removals guidance, you know, would your transaction be in line with that guidance or not? And I can later on, I don't know if you would come to this, but I can highlight what are the issues in 6.4 that have prevented guidance from being adopted, but we can get to it later.
Thank you. Andre Sobolewski had a question. Andre, can you unmute and ask? Looks like your question got upvoted by a few people as well.
Sure, thank you. I did not attend the COP meetings, but as an outsider, I get the distinct impression that there are actually two groups of people interested in CDR, or at least they have two different focuses. A group of people focusing on finding climate solutions. They're the people at AirMiners that I meet more regularly. There's also, it seems to me, another group of people much more focused on this new emerging market and a potential for a new source of revenue. And my question to you is that, is that your perception as well? And if so, do these focuses, will they eventually converge or will they diverge? That's my question.
Eva, please.
Yeah, I can take this one. Well, if you think about it, kind of one serves the other, because carbon markets. So we have here on the panel 3 people who know climate policy really well, and climate policy. If you kind of drill down, then you have options like carbon pricing. That if you drill down, you have options of carbon markets. So this is one of the tools to achieve the climate action, right? But of course, what the removals community mostly knows is markets as a solution for scaling removals, because we haven't really created, well, if we leave out what the US is doing, which is quite different, but we haven't really created too many other policy tools that are widely available. And even voluntary market, to be honest, it's really not the policy tool in a country, but as it's now feeding also into compliance markets, and it will, you know, the markets are becoming kind of more mixed, so it has an impact. So for sure, markets are not the answer to everything. We'll have other policy tools that are going to be used for scaling removals, but right now, voluntary markets is I would say the most accessible tool. So that's why it's getting the that's why it's getting the attention. But yeah, it's just the markets as a solution fits under, you know, fixing the climate. That's how we work with it as a climate policy tool.
Yeah. Olga, then Helen.
Yeah, I think I would say that actually more than two. You know, there are those that are looking at solutions, that are those that are trying to create marketplaces through which the solutions can be funded. And there are those who think that there's no need in market solutions, there's just need for better regulation. And whether they would converge or diverge, I don't know. It tends to vary. You know, I've been there for more than 20 years, and it tends to vary a lot. Sometimes they converge, sometimes they diverge. Right now, we're at the point of divergence.
Yeah, I think it's a great observation, Olga, much better than what I was going to say. And Andre, I'm happy if Jason wants to share this. Building on Eva's work and other work from Carbon Gap and Carbon Future, built a CDR policy meta map at the back end of last year. It's already a little bit out of date, but what I was doing there was which countries are legislating on CDR. We talked about the Paris Agreement is all about these nationally determined contributions, these national pledges. So national legislation will be really important for us. And that will take different forms. And I was looking there at procurement mandates, I was looking at carbon markets, I was looking at corporate disclosure, environmental claims, and then also looking what might happen internationally. So please do take a look at that and the timelines. And what came out clearly from that was there's a bit of time before policymakers feel comfortable potentially with durable carbon dioxide removal. And what Olga's been saying to us is, please bring examples, please bring what you're doing to policymakers. I think that's great action for us for 2024. And then trying to see what will push out demand in the shorter term. And it looks like environmental claims and maybe some elements around what's happening in California might be the first to happen. And then obviously as we grow these different markets. So there'll be lots of different policies. And what's exciting about the construct we have is that governments can go first and faster. And that obviously will, if you're working in a specific country, that will help you support your projects as well. So yeah, look at national level as well. We've been talking here a lot about transboundary, which is important. And then also for this community, please do look also at the aviation market. International aviation is outside of the Paris Agreement, the so-called Carbon Offsetting Reduction Scheme for International Aviation, CORSIA. And that there is how, if you do produce carbon credits, they will need to be correspondingly adjusted, i.e. adjusted outside of national pledges because they go into the aviation market. And that again is this kind of Article 6 track, if I'm not using Olga's language wrong. Again, all standards getting ready for that. And that aviation market could potentially be something where demand might come from in the shorter term. Depends again on the method that you're looking at and also the price of your carbon credits. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. One thing that we've certainly observed in our Tito and I and Adina have observed, and Deborah, in working with our launchpad companies, is that any kind of market signal is going to provide a backstop, not just for other carbon credit buyers, but for finance to come in. And that could take the form of government procurement. It could take the form of government transactions. It could of compliance markets. So yes, what Helen mentioned just now is super critical. Question I have for the panel is, what are some of the concrete next steps, meetings that are going to happen over the next, again, 9 or 10 and 11 months in the run up to the next COP that people in the audience can help influence? I know, Olga, please.
Yes, well, the ESB so far has 4 meetings planned, and there will be discussions. So the removal guidance will be again into consideration, and I think the first meeting will just be a reassessment of what has happened and what it means for the ESB, for the guidance. But then we will need to grapple with the issues of why we didn't have a decision. And the reason why is that the EU wanted to change the definition of reversals. So that's one of the things to look into, and maybe doesn't affect the engineering-based CDR community that much, but it does affect the nature-based community a lot. And so it's going to be a really, really big issue of, whether that definition stays as it was adopted in 2023 or whether it changes. I think that's where the policy work will be so far, and that's the only, and of course the EU, the green claims, and whether any voluntary transactions would require to be an Article 6 transaction in addition. This CORSIA is, though it's outside of the aviation market, even though it's outside of Paris agreements, it's actually required to be in Article 6 market. You would have to have an ITMO, a corresponding adjustment according to Article 6.2. If you are selling units and the Corsair.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Itaru Shirishi, please feel free to unmute and ask. Itaru?
I think that was a question I answered already.
Oh, you answered in the chat. Okay.
Unless he had several.
No.
No, he says he can't unmute. Okay. No, no worries at all. No worries at all. Scott Bell, what's your, feel free to unmute and ask.
You bet. So yeah, thank you so much for all the work that's gone into 6.4. From the discussion, it kind of sounds like ITMOs versus protocols were a big holdup. You mentioned the definition change, which it sounds like a lot of energy went into. And I'll certainly try and understand and digest here. To me, one of the major parts in 2023's 6.4 was that it mirrored regulatory protocol requirements in terms of additionality, ISO compliance, and monitoring, things that I think the community has stepped up to in a big way. And it also formalized inclusive removals. And I think those were a lot more important than having kind of a new body with its own set of protocols. So I'm curious if there were any sticking points on those that you'd like to see us work on as a community. And again, that's mirroring regulatory protocol requirements and inclusive removals.
Jason, should I just answer?
Please.
Yeah, I think for people there's for a very long time, the sort of everything that comes after Kyoto Protocol, the ISO and all of the voluntary standard, that is already work that was happening under CDM. So what 6.4 did is really just sort of copying what has already existed, right? These are not fundamental sticking points. This has existed before ISO, before any voluntary standards have done it. What was surprising is that voluntary standards have not had it, some of them, and some of the voluntary registers have not had it. So there's need for actually, applying the standards that were there before, and they would need to be considered absolutely basic. I think where the more cutting edge issues, right? The things that when I say, there's not enough experience, is risk assessments, I think the monitoring of permanence and the issue of, I know that, for engineering, for example, removals, the issue of permanence is dealt with differently than for other removals. But, the monitoring parts of it, the monitoring cycles, the verification cycles, for example, 6.4, we've had good discussions, and I think that they're important going forward, which we had no resolution, is really, would we have a risk of reversal? What do you do? What are the actions? What are the costs of these actions? And these are the type of things where actually the more practical experience is needed. It's not enough of it. It's very easy for us to work on things like, additionality, sort of compliance, real emissions, etc. Because for this, there's plenty of experience, right? But for this other more the newer things that have not existed before, right? For this lack of experience.
Thank you. One last question, if we could squeeze it in from Millie S. Millie, could you unmute and ask?
Hello, thank you so much for letting me ask this question, and thank you to all the panelists.
So in my head, there's a like-for-like issue, and emissions metrics are not commensurable at the moment. So how is the Article 6 community going to include for like in UN negotiations, and also create international methodological standards across really diverse technologies? Thank you.
Yeah. Eva, please.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you were expecting an answer from me, but I'm gonna put my ideas out there first, and then maybe others can quickly add. I think this is one of those discussions that probably hasn't taken place enough in the context of Article 6, and is likely to get more and more focus. I think also with Olga referring to, what reversals actually are and how that impacts the nature-based removals, because there are stakeholders, and I think that amount will increase. But already last autumn, I heard a lot of those voices that the way Article 6 is built and the way the Paris Agreement is built right now, because Paris Agreement is just about, balancing emissions and removals, and in the second half of the century, it doesn't say what you can balance with what and how. So the question is, how do we build that kind of framework under the Article 6? Because there are stakeholders who are not keen on seeing fossil emissions balanced with non-permanent removals, and that is problematic. So currently, not 6.2 or 6.4 have anything in there that caters for that, and I expect that there's going to be more push for that. There is already, I think, plenty of stakeholders advocating, for example, in the NDCs, so national climate pledges, to clarify, for example, how emission reductions and removals relate to each other, ideally having separate targets, and ideally even clarifying to which extent nature-based or permanent removals are being used. So I think this is a discussion that will get more attention in 2024, especially regarding the international carbon markets, than it has so far. And yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing where we end up by the end of the year.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. We are just about at time, and I wanted to say, first of all, thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you, Olga. Thank you, Helen. Thank you, Eva. Thank you, Tito. And most of all, and thank you, Deborah, for working on the back end of all the questions and logistics of today. And also, most of all, thank you to you as an audience. We can't do this without your participation, without your interest in what we do. So very appreciative of that. In that light, Deborah just shared the link to a post-event survey. How do we meet your standards? How do we miss the mark? What can we do to improve our events in the future? Also note that we have our next event, which is going to be our AirMiners Town Hall on January 23rd. So you can hear us pull back the veil a little bit about what is going on in AirMiners and how you can participate. Finally, this is a general plug for our Launchpad program. If you're a startup who is interested in learning more about how carbon markets work, how to negotiate, to get a leg up on your very early stage startup, think maybe like if you're a 2 or 3 or 4 person company, this is the program for you, with applications due on Thursday the 11th. So tomorrow. So they say. So that's what I would focus on if you are interested in participating in our Launchpad next batch. That's going to kick off in late January, running 6 weeks. So thank you so much.